Alors, bonjour à vous tous. Nous commençons notre premier panel intitulé « Financement du développement, les MDB, IFIs, en quête d'un nouveau modèle ». Notre modératrice sera Mme Kaouthar Mehrez. Madame, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Bonjour, je suis vraiment ravie d'être avec vous ce matin et je remercie le TABC et M. Anis Jaziri de m'avoir invité pour animer ce panel. Mais avant cela, j'aimerais partager avec vous une bonne nouvelle qui nous vient directement de la Ligue des États arabes pour le développement agricole. J'invite donc sur scène Dr Salman Sabar et Dr Nabi Al-Jabr pour vous en parler. Gentlemen, please. Dr Salman.
Salam alaikum. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولاً أعرفكم بنفسي، أنا دكتور سلمان، رئيس مجموعة إنوفيشن جروب القابضة المتخصصة في إنشاء الصناديق وعضو في المنظمة العربية للتنمية الزراعية تابعة للجامعة العربية. أولاً قبل أي شيء نحب نعزي أخوتنا في ليبيا ونقول لهم المصاب واحد وعظم الله أجركم على ما فيه. اليوم نحمل مبادرة تابعة للأمين العام للجامعة العربية. هذه المبادرة هي جديدة في الساحة وجديدة في سوق الصناديق. قيمتها تبتدئ من 200 مليون دولار، مخصصة في التبادل الزراعي في الوطن العربي، والهدف من وراءه تخفيض ومحاربة التضخم الذي في المنطقة. اسمحوا لي أن أقرأ نص الرسالة من السيد فخامة الأمين العام للجامعة العربية كما جاءت، وهي أمانة النقل. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بداية تهدي المنظمة العربية للتنمية الزراعية أطيب التحايا وأصدق المشاعر إلى السادة إدارة المؤتمر، وتتمنى لكم التوفيق والسداد. في إطار تنفيذ مبادرة الأمين العام لجامعة الدول العربية في دعم القطاع الزراعي في الوطن العربي ومن أجل تحقيق الأمن الغذائي المحلي والإقليمي، والتي كلفت المنظمة العربية للتنمية الزراعية بمتابعتها بالتنسيق مع الفاعلين في القطاع العام والخاص نفيد سعادتكم أن المنظمة العربية بالتعاون مع مجموعة انوفيشن جروب والسادة ساقية الخير وآخرين في القطاع الخاص قد توافقوا على إنشاء صندوق استثماري لدعم وإنفاذ بنود المبادرة، وحتى تأخذ هذه المبادرة الإعلام المطلوب لجميع العاملين في القطاع الخاص من أجل إتاحة الفرصة لهم للدخول والمشاركة والاستفادة والفرصة والمبادرة. كما نرجو التكرم في إبداء وإعطاء الدكتور سلمان المؤتمر في هذا الأمر. انتهى. السادة الحضور، نبتدئ بإذن الله في الإعلان الأولي في إنشاء الصندوق يعتبر الأكبر والأهم في هذه المنطقة بقيمة 200 مليون دولار، بداية من أستاذنا والدكتور نبيه الجبر في المملكة العربية السعودية بالتعاون مع دول الخليج العربي ودول المنطقة. وهذا يعتبر في إطار مهم جدا ومحاربة مكافحة التضخم الذي يحصل، وللأسف أن نجد من يدفع هذا الأمر هو المواطن العادي في النهاية. فلذلك بإذن الله سوف تكون خطوات فاعلة خلال الفترات القادمة، وخطوات حقيقية في أرض الواقع تطبق بشكل ملموس ما بين المزارع والمزارع، ويصل بها بالنهاية إلى هدف مهم جدا، أن احنا نصل في هذا الهدف أن نحن نخفض بشكل مباشر القيمة السلعية في النهاية إلى الاند يوزر، وهذا الهدف الرئيسي فيه. ونختتم بإذن الله في نقطة مهمة جدا، أن درس وعبرة مهمة جدا من خلال ما حصل في أخوتنا في ليبيا، أن الإنسان ضعيف جدا، وأن الإنسان يبقى للإنسان، ويبقى إن لم نساعد بعضنا بعضا في هذه الدنيا فهي فانية. شكرا لكم. دكتور نبي تفضل.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أولا أشكركم على إتاحة الفرصة لنعلن هذا المبادرة وهذا الصندوق لأول مرة، والأصل أن إعلانه صراحة في جامعة الدول العربية الأسبوع القادم، لكن تقديرا لجهودكم في هذا المؤتمر سعينا إلى إعلان هذا الصندوق. شركة ساقية الخير أمثلها كرئيس مجلس الإدارة، شركة سعودية مستثمرة في دول عديدة، أكبر استثماراتها موجودة في السودان، تعمل في القطاع الزراعي والحيواني. لنا تعاون حاليا مع باكستان، كازاخستان، جورجيا، رومانيا، عدة دول، وتحديدا بعد أزمة الكوفيد لتحقيق الأمن الغذائي. سعت الحكومة السعودية بالإضافة إلى صندوق الاستثمارات العامة BIF في أنها تتعاون مع القطاع الخاص لتأمين الأمن الغذائي للمنطقة وللدول الأخرى. نقطة أخيرة، سنكون الممولين والمشرفين الرئيسيين على هذا الفند تحت هيئة سوق المال السعودية. سيقوم هذا الصندوق بتأمين التبادل السلعي بتوفير المواد الأولية للمزارع والشركات الزراعية مقابل أخذ المحاصيل وتعاون الدول على الحصول على المحاصيل بأسعار مناسبة وبيعها وتوزيعها على الدول الأخرى بهامش ربح قليل. طبعا ستقولون وش فائدتكم؟ فائدتنا طبعا ستكون من الحصول على خصومات، من الحصول على لوجستيك، من سلاسل إمداد، من نقل، من تخزين، سيكون كل هذا تحت إشراف هذا الصندوق. ونأسف للإطالة والتطفل عليكم في هذا اللقاء، وأشكركم شكرا جزيلا على إتاحة الفرصة مرة أخرى. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا لكم وللجامعة العربية على هذه المبادرة الطيبة والتي أتت في أوانها في هذه الظروف الصعبة. Ce matin, nous avons vraiment une opportunité unique d'échanger avec des participants aussi brillants qu'influents, de divers horizons. Ils façonnent le visage de la finance de demain en innovant et en faisant des choix forts qui auraient un impact conséquent sur le développement économique et social en Afrique. Permettez-moi donc d'introduire Mme Malin Bloomberg, s'il vous plaît, Madame, directrice générale adjointe du hub régional de l'Afrique du Nord et directrice pays pour la Tunisie, la Libye et la Mauritanie pour la Banque africaine de développement. J'appelle également M. Kodjo Attaty, souscripteur régional pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest et l'Afrique centrale chez Azizi. M. John Martin Ndawula, vice-président associé, institution financière et trade pour Africa Finance Corp, AFC. M. Richard Jones, directeur du financement et du développement des PME à l'est et au sud de la Méditerranée pour BERD. Et M. Aymen Zoghbi, directeur du financement, du commerce et de l'investissement inter-africain pour AFREXIMBANK. Bienvenue. Les perspectives semblent difficiles pour les économies africaines car elles supportent généralement différents types de risques. On distingue les risques endogènes tels que l'instabilité politique et les différents challenges socio-économiques et les risques exogènes liés aux problèmes mondiaux au-delà de leurs frontières car ils empruntent en devises étrangères. Ce fut le cas, je ne sais pas si vous vous rappelez, au début de la pandémie, juste avant le grand soutien monétaire et l'immense quantité de liquidités qui a été injectée sur les marchés financiers, notamment par les États-Unis et par l'Union européenne. Les économies émergentes sont toujours en jeu en cas de ralentissement économique dans les pays développés, notamment aux États-Unis et en Europe, et également en cas de conflits géopolitiques systémiques tels que la guerre en Ukraine, et aussi dans le cas de tensions commerciales comme celle entre les États-Unis et la Chine, ou bien celle entre les États-Unis et l'Europe durant la présidence de Trump. En d'autres termes, les économies africaines payent le prix fort lorsque le sentiment du marché devient négatif, ce qui entraîne une aversion au risque chez les investisseurs. À titre d'exemple, en 2018, nous avons vu le marché international des capitaux se fermer complètement aux émetteurs africains pendant le second semestre à cause des tensions commerciales sino-américaines. Et la même chose en 2022, à la suite du conflit russo-ukrainien. Les mêmes causes entraînent toujours les mêmes conséquences. Aujourd'hui, outre les tensions géopolitiques, l'inflation lancinante qui touche plus particulièrement les produits essentiels et le ralentissement de l'économie mondiale, les pays émergents sont confrontés à des vents adverses et plus particulièrement sur le plan financier. D'un côté, le besoin croissant d'un soutien gouvernemental à l'activité économique dans un contexte de reprise post-pandémique et de l'autre, les niveaux élevés de dette souveraine déclenchant des signaux d'alarme quant à la soutenabilité de la dette. Selon le FMI d'ailleurs, 60 pays émergents sont en surendettement aigu ou risquent de le devenir. À cela s'ajoutent les changements climatiques qui causent de plus en plus de catastrophes naturelles engendrant des dégâts matériels et humains importants. Donc, ce sont dans ces conditions que les institutions multilatérales de développement doivent opérer. Mais comme a dit Sénèque, seul l'arbre qui a subi les assauts du vent est vraiment vigoureux, car c'est dans cette lutte que ses racines, mises à l'épreuve, se fortifient. En effet, les marchés restent difficiles d'accès, voire fermés à la quasi-totalité des pays africains. D'ailleurs, en 2023, uniquement l'Égypte et le Maroc ont pu y accéder, mais à un niveau 4 fois plus cher qu'en 2019, c'est-à-dire juste avant la pandémie. En revanche, les marchés sont toujours ouverts aux institutions multilatérales de développement qui ont un meilleur profil de risque et qui misent sur des solutions innovantes, généralement basées sur le développement durable. Les investisseurs apprécient énormément cette classe d'actifs, comme le démontre le volume émis par les banques multilatérales de développement dans les pays émergents et qui se trouve en hausse de 25% à ce jour comparé à la même date en 2022. Ainsi, les banques multilatérales peuvent accéder au marché à des conditions financières avantageuses, que ce soit sous format de transactions publiques ou de placements privés, des fois même à des coûts concessionnels. Madame Malin Bloomberg, la Banque africaine de développement, l'unique institution financière africaine notée AAA, peut s'y financer quelles que soient les conditions de marché à des taux et à des coûts extrêmement avantageux. Comment fait-elle, selon vous, refléter cela dans le financement de l'économie africaine?
Thank you very much, Mme Kaouthar. I will respond in English. And first of all, I would like to express on behalf of the African Development Bank our condolences for the people of Morocco and the people of Libya in the recent events. We are supporting the emergency efforts going on right now, and of course we will take part also in the following reconstruction of these countries. So to answer your question about our access to these preferential rates in the market, thanks to our AAA rating, yes, of course we have the rates, and of course as we provide financing to our clients, to our regional member countries, to private sectors, we do pass on to different extents these decent rates. But perhaps also more importantly is we can also provide longer maturities. And this is especially important in terms of financing infrastructure that requires long investment periods for the returns. So what it also means for us as a development bank is that we do not have to focus as much purely on financial returns of projects, but we can have a broader perspective on development and focus more on economic rates of return for the society. As you know, development is quite complex and needs so many different types of interventions at the same time. And this is what we can offer support as and when needed in the different countries that we intervene. It may be in some countries we support project investments, infrastructure, health, other sectors. In other countries we may support institutional reform to improve the business climate. We support directly the private sector, such as financial institutions providing liquidity to commercial banks. And we support entrepreneurs who need some startup funding. All of this is required for the development, and especially the development of the private sector, who in the end are the ones who are going to drive the economy forward. So how we do this, the main products that we have to offer, we provide loans to governments, we provide loans to large-scale private sector companies. We do not usually find directly the SMEs. This is through the financial institutions that we channel our funds, since we are not set up to directly provide financing for very small businesses. When we support the private sector, we always want to be a minority. We do not want to finance more than 30%, and we should only intervene when there is a financing gap that the private sector itself cannot fill, because we are there to catalyze other financiers. Increasingly over the past few years, we also focus more on guarantees. And here we can provide guarantees either for non-payment, for example, or for political risk. We do some equity, often in either large strategic institutions in Africa or in funds. But because of our AAA, we are quite limited in terms of the risk appetite, so we're a bit limited. And finally, we have access to grants, and these grants we can use for technical assistance, or we can also use them for viability gap funding, again, to help the private sector deals come to fruition. Now, all of this we are currently doing ourselves, but when we do have limits because of the AAA, we find other alternatives. For example, we were limited in how much funding we could provide for infrastructure to meet the needs. So together with African governments, the African Development Bank set up Africa50, which is an investment vehicle for project development and project finance of infrastructure. And they have a more appetite for risk, a different risk profile than us. So this is just an example of how we then can also contribute more strategically. But still, the instruments that we have, and I think all of us together on this panel, are not enough as it is to meet the development challenge of Africa. So we have continuously got many innovative initiatives underway to try to use our balance sheet even more. What it comes down to is two things in everything that we do. It's about partnerships and it's about leverage. So it's about us using our convening power, which I think we all have as multilateral development banks, and it's about using our resources strategically to bring others on board to have bigger transformational impact on the projects that we do. And we do see the need. You hear in the media a lot, and we're very actively involved in this redesign of the financial landscape, of the way that multilateral development banks support the clients. And there is so much opportunity still to be more efficient. It's still too difficult to channel financing to Africa. So one of the things that we are spearheading as part of the African Development Bank together with the Inter-American Development Bank is rechanneling the IMF special drawing rights to multilateral development banks, especially since 2021 when the special drawing rights SDRs increased. There are some developed countries who are not using their own SDRs. They're sitting idle. And so we are really advocating to channel them to multilateral development banks, like a AAA rated. We can leverage this money and triple or quadruple these drawing rights if we were to receive them. So if this, we're still working on this and lobbying for this, if this comes through, it will be truly transformational for Africa. And this is one of the examples on how we want to progress on the continent. Thank you.
Merci. En fait, en général, nous voudrions savoir dans quelle mesure et comment les pays africains peuvent-ils bénéficier de l'offre des banques multilatérales de développement. Et je vais commencer par le soutien budgétaire aux États. Donc, Monsieur Aymen Zoghbi, nous savons que AFREXIMBANK, et merci beaucoup, a fait des transactions de soutien budgétaire en Afrique. Pourriez-vous, s'il vous plaît, partager avec nous quelques exemples et, dans la mesure du possible, le cadre et les conditions de ces transactions?
Merci beaucoup, Kaouthar. Je suis très peu en français, donc si vous le permettez, je vais continuer en anglais. Mais après, كما العادة يعني خليني أبدأ أنا مصري لكن تونس بلدي وبيتي يعني فدايما بحب أحيي الموجودين بالدرجة التونسية ونقول لهم مع السلامة الناس الكل وربي يفضلكم وإن شاء الله تقضوا معنا يوم ظريف. But to answer your question back to English, sorry about the Arabic, I was just greeting the audience. But back to your question, in AFREXIMBANK we really consider Africa as our home. That's our continent, that's our market, and we have nowhere else to go. So no matter what the circumstances are and the negative market conditions are, we are there to support. We are created to help African countries to stand on their feet and to support strategic sectors in those economies. So really over the past period there has been a lot of economic crisis, COVID, then the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and this really has posed a lot of challenges on many African countries. And we try to always, as in the African Export-Import Bank, we try to be relevant, we try to be innovative in providing so many market instruments and financing products that would mitigate the negative impact of those adverse conditions. So for example, for the COVID, we've introduced a COVID impact mitigation facility, under which we provided financing of over $7 billion to various African countries and various African central banks. For the Ukraine crisis, we've done the same. We've done also a Ukraine crisis impact mitigation facility, under which we also provided financing of over $6 billion. And we've helped procure vaccines for the COVID to many African countries, including Tunisia, where we are. But more importantly, we try to provide financing to African countries by leveraging on their relationship with other African countries. So we provide budgetary support within the context of intra-African trade and region integration. So for example, when we are providing budgetary support to countries to help procure strategic commodities, for example, we do so by focusing on or giving priority to financing procurement of commodities from neighboring countries. For example, in the case of Tunisia, we provide financing for Tunisia to be able to get gas from Algeria, which is a neighboring country, another African country. So we try to use the budgetary support financing to promote region integration by focusing and prioritizing procurement from neighboring countries. We also help indirectly through giving support to African companies to do infrastructure work in other African countries. So for example, Libya is not a member country of the bank currently, but we're helping by providing support to Egyptian construction companies to do infrastructure work in Libya. So really over the past 6 years, we've been able to provide over $20 billion financing on revolving basis within the context of intra-African trade and investment. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Il y a aussi le financement de projets stratégiques. Donc, Monsieur John Martin Ndawula, sur quel secteur AFC se focalise et quelles sont les propriétés principales des projets financés par AFC en termes de taille de projet, de tickets d'entrée, de timing et également de nature de participation, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Kaouthar. Je suis anglophone, puis je vous prie que je parle en anglais. Pardonnez-moi. I bring you greetings from Africa Finance Corporation, headquartered in Lagos, Nigeria. We're a Pan-African multilateral that was set up in 2007 by both public and private sector entities. In fact, right now, in addition to the public and private sector entities, there are also other DFIs and even African sovereigns that are shareholders of Africa Finance Corporation. So the raison d'être of AFC is really to invest in Africa infrastructure assets that are aimed at closing the infrastructure gap in Africa. Why infrastructure? Because infrastructure carries a very significant multiplier when it comes to the development of African economies. And that is why the people that set up AFC saw it fit to tackle this area, because it is an area of significant need across the African continent. So AFC's model is fairly straightforward. We raise financing, especially from the international capital markets. We mobilize additional financing, as my colleague said. I think as a DFI, in addition to we deploying capital, we also need partnerships to get more capital, because this is infrastructure, and as I said, the need is huge. No single entity can satisfy it. Once we have collected this financing, we then deploy it into critical bankable projects in Africa, with the hope of achieving our mandate, which is to promote economic development, but also returning profits to our shareholders. So AFC is a unique DFI in that we are also commercially oriented. The work that we do is work that needs to be commercially viable. So the way we do what we do is along verticals that we have termed key sectors. The key sectors include, I'll just list them, there are four. First of all, natural resources. So this one includes our oil and gas and metals and mining projects. And then we have another one called power, which includes all your renewable projects, wind, hydro, etc. And then we have transport and logistics, which includes the airports, the seaports, rail, highways. And then we have another one called heavy industry and telecoms and technology. It used to be heavy industry and telecoms, but as we know, technology and fintechs is becoming an area of increasing importance in Africa, more so because of the fact that the penetration of financial services in Africa has been low, and therefore we found that we need to place more emphasis on technology as a means of ensuring that financial services reach the African populace. So we invest along these key sectors, developing projects that will lead to the economic development which I spoke about. I think we are unique in that we develop projects along the entire project cycle. We go from projects that require early funding. There are projects which, the need has been identified and the idea is good, but they're just that, they're just an idea, and therefore they need to be incubated. And that's where our financial advisory and project development capabilities come in. And then we also look at projects that might have been developed for whom feasibility studies have been done and they are quote-unquote bankable. We can finance those either as equity or debt. And then we also look at already existing projects that might need more debt maybe to expand, either in terms of their operations or even geographically. And when we are doing this, as I said, I mentioned equity and debt, we invest across the entire capital structure from equity to debt and everything in between. So that is also something else that we do as Africa Finance Corporation. I'll mention some key themes for us at AFC. A key theme that we are emphasizing right now is beneficiation, the addition of value. I think we'll all agree that in the entire world, Africa is probably one of, if not the most resource-rich continents. But we've lagged behind because we've continued to export raw materials as opposed to the addition of value and the export of commodities that are slightly better priced in order to benefit more the countries from where they originate. I think a good example of this is the Ivory Coast. The price of cocoa in its raw form as opposed to a piece of chocolate, right? So value addition is something that we emphasize greatly, and the way we've done that is to pursue integrated value chains across the continent. A good example is Gabon. Gabon used to export raw timber. We've gone in there, we've developed special economic zones that now harvest the timber, they process it, they manufacture things like wood veneer, etc. And then we've developed a port such that it goes from the forests into processing and evacuation to the international markets. So the country is definitely benefiting more. Another key theme is the platform model. So we invest in infrastructure across platforms. We've clubbed all our port assets, for instance, into a single platform across the continent. We've clubbed our power and renewables projects into another one. And we've also done the same with special economic zones. Besides infrastructure, AFC is A-rated and we are also US dollar funded. So we also channel our support through financial institutions. Trade finance being another area where we are keenly interested. So we support African financial institutions with both funding and also guarantees, especially to cover non-payment. We also support African governments, be it with short-term budgetary support or even strategic partnerships to undertake key sovereign objectives, which involves the longer-term financing, which my colleague also spoke about. Yeah, thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Jones, le secteur privé est de plus en plus au centre de l'attention des institutions multilatérales de développement. Et pour IBRD, c'est même une cible bien particulière. Pourriez-vous, s'il vous plaît, nous expliquer pourquoi, comment, et peut-on espérer des conditions de financement avantageuses, voire concessionnelles? Merci beaucoup.
Merci Kaouthar, bonjour à tous. Moi aussi je suis anglophone, donc je vais parler en anglais. So I'd like to start by thanking and congratulating Anis Jaziri and the TABC for the organization of this excellent event. And on behalf of EBRD, it's an honor to be part of it. I'd like to just give a little bit of a history talk about the EBRD, which is a relatively new institution in Africa, although we've been active in Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt since 2012. We were founded in 1991 as a multilateral development bank by a shareholding that now numbers over 70 international sovereign shareholders. And we were founded at the moment of the transition in Central and Eastern Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the basic insight was that the private sector, which had been somewhat neglected in those state-administered, centrally planned economies of Central and Eastern Europe, the private sector is a superior deliverer, in many cases, of public goods, such as innovation and growth and job creation, than the public sector. And that is both in qualitative terms, but also in terms of volume. The challenges that are around these public goods, and now we also include very much new challenges like the green transition and the digital transition. These challenges require enormous volumes of financing, which can only come from an enabled private sector. So this sort of initial founding insight of the EBRD remains very much in place, and it remained in place when we expanded geographically to other countries in Caucasus and in Central Asia, and then in 2012 to the southern Mediterranean, and then in 2017 again to Lebanon and the West Bank. And earlier this year, our governors, representing our 73 shareholders, agreed that the EBRD should also have a perspective to work in some countries of sub-Saharan Africa. And so that is a perspective that we're now beginning to work towards. So what does it mean to be focused on the private sector? More than 75% of our investments are to private sector companies, and we're very much a project-focused institution. We work with clients with particular challenges focused on investing in particular countries. Cumulatively, we've invested 180 billion euros. Last year, we invested into 431 projects across our 35 countries of operations, and these range from very large projects and mega projects of €500 million, right down to very small projects to SMEs of €1 million or even less, frequently in local currency, and we've done a number of such projects here in Tunisia. Every EBRD project is characterized by two important principles. It should have a benefit which is systemic in terms of the impact on the wider economy, in terms of promoting the qualities of what we call a modern, sustainable market economy. And those qualities, there are 6 of them that we work with. Those are competitiveness, resilience, integration across borders as well as within sectors within a country. Also resilience, I think I said, well-governed and green and inclusive. So we always try to advance those transition qualities in our projects. And the other very important principle that we work with is the principle of working with the market. So we don't lend concessional funding to the private sector that will crowd out private investors. We're always seeking to bring in private investors to catalyze private investment, and the mobilization of private sector financing is a core priority of the bank. Now, every country where we work is also a shareholder of the EBRD, and that's really important for the bank's positioning between the state and the market. So, as I said, we focus on dealing with private sector clients for particular investment projects that they have, but we also work at the level of the state to enhance the enabling environment for those investments. So we work on legislation, we work on regulations, we work on the ecosystem at the state level, but very much with an investment attraction focus in mind. And that goes for attracting large private sector investments, it goes for developing capital markets, but it also goes for working with SMEs and developing the ecosystem for SMEs. Now, we don't only have investments as a tool to do that. We also work with international partners, and also with some of the profits of the EBRD that are generated through our other projects to provide technical assistance to our clients and to the authorities to help create the conditions for these investments. And in some cases, we also provide investment grants, which create a concessional element, indeed, for some of our investments. I just want to give two examples of what we do in the region, which I think are quite indicative of how the EBRD works. And both of them are built on a really important feature of the EBRD, which is that we have quite sizable local teams in each of the countries where we work. So we hire locally, and we hire, we hope, very good people who understand the markets and understand particular sectors, and that enables us really to have traction and a proper understanding with the local investment community and with local entrepreneurs. So the two examples I want to give, first of all, are the green energy financing facilities, where we work through commercial banks. We've done that in particular in Egypt and Morocco, where together we've invested more than €1 billion through those facilities. We provide technical assistance to the banks to enable them to better understand the risks and the advantages of working in the green transition. Increasingly now, we're working on their low-carbon transition plans in the context of the Paris Agreement on climate change. And then we provide funding which goes through those banks, targeting specific investments for renewable energy, solar PV installations, wind power installations, but also energy efficiency, energy management systems in the corporate sector. And crucially, we also provide advisory alongside those credit lines that goes to the enterprises themselves so that they can design the projects and select the best equipment for these measures to be effective. And those enterprises also benefit, as I mentioned, from an incentive grant to incentivize these investments, because the thing about green investments is they all have a rate of return which is attractive. They reduce costs, but it's rare that they are at the top of the list of priorities of a CFO. So we have found that it is necessary to provide as much assistance as we can to help those investments to rise up the priority ranking for decision makers in enterprises. And then the other program I want to mention is the SME advisory program that we have in all of our countries of operations, because we recognize that SMEs are the engine of growth and the engine of employment in all countries. That's particularly the case, I would say, in the countries of the southern Mediterranean. I believe it's also the case in other countries in Africa. And there is, of course, an enormous imperative, as we heard in the opening messages, to facilitate youth entrepreneurship and to facilitate the creation of jobs. And where that starts from is having the right kind of advice, the right kind of mentoring that can provide a real targeted technical expertise in specific areas, be it in financial planning, be it in marketing, be it in governance, or any other area related to firm growth and related to the possibility to access finance. So we work with our partners to provide that advice. And we work also with the local consultancy sector to increase the capacity of that sector. And we work with international experts and we make the match between individual SMEs and those service providers. And then we connect that advisory work to the financing programs that we have through banks and through equity and venture capital funds. So that's what I'd like to say for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So to summarize, if we can, if you may so, not only you bring financing, but expertise and know-how to the African continent. So thank you very much. Donc, je vais re-switcher en français. Nous savons que la force des institutions multilatérales de développement réside dans leur bon profil de risque et une très bonne notation, tous deux meilleurs que les souverains africains. Comment est-ce qu'elles arrivent à tenir un équilibre difficile entre préserver son bon profil de risque d'un côté et le devoir de financer le développement de l'autre côté, et ce devoir implique souvent de tenir dans son portefeuille des actifs sub-investment grade. Donc quel est le secret d'Attidi, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Attaty?
Merci, Kaouthar. Je pense que je suis le seul francophone sur ce panel et j'aimerais bien parler français aux frères francophones qui sont dans la salle. Donc, je suis M. Kodjo Attaty, souscripteur régional de Attidi. Attidi n'est rien d'autre que African Trade Insurance Agency, ATI. Pour ceux qui connaissent cette institution, ATI, African Trade Insurance Agency en anglais, en français c'est l'Agence pour l'assurance du commerce en Afrique, une initiative des États africains avec le soutien financier et technique de la Banque mondiale qui a vu jour en 2021. D'abord au Kenya, une initiative des pays du COMESA, maintenant ça s'étend en Afrique de l'Ouest et puis en Afrique centrale et aussi en Afrique du Nord, bien sûr, parce qu'il y a des pays déjà candidats à l'adhésion de notre institution. En Afrique de l'Ouest, c'est pourquoi je suis basé à Abidjan pour être le responsable régional de l'institution en Afrique de l'Ouest. Donc, notre institution a pour rôle de promouvoir le commerce, en garantissant le risque crédit. Sous cet angle, nous travaillons avec les institutions financières telles que les banques et autres institutions financières en facilitant le dialogue entre ces institutions et ces clients. Quelquefois, c'est des problèmes de single obligor limite qui limitent les banques, ou bien c'est des problèmes de garantie. Nous sommes une institution qui catalyse ce dialogue entre la banque et son client en apportant à la banque la garantie dont elle a besoin pour accorder la facilité à son client. De l'autre côté, nous sommes nés pour promouvoir l'investissement direct étranger en Afrique à travers la garantie des risques politiques. C'est des risques de type MIGA que tout le monde connaît, la rupture unilatérale des contrats par le pays hôte, le retrait abusif de la licence d'exploitation, le non-respect du gouvernement dans ses obligations de respect de paiement des facilités à la banque. Donc voilà ce que nous faisons. Donc nous soutenons aussi bien le gouvernement et les entités publiques et le secteur privé à faire des affaires. C'est ce que nous faisons. Nous sommes une institution d'une notation crédit A par Standard & Poor's, et puis récemment avec Moody's aussi, A3 stable, avec une perspective positive par Moody's, donc qui fait de nous quand même, qui nous place parmi les meilleures institutions multilatérales africaines ayant cette notation crédit. Donc pour revenir à la question de Kaouthar, comment est-ce que nous pouvons concilier ces deux rôles? Donc nous sommes une institution qui est née par traité international conformément à la Charte des Nations Unies, article 102. Chaque État qui devait adhérer à notre institution signe notre traité portant création de notre institution après ratification par le Parlement de cet État. Non seulement la signature du traité, mais cet État doit également signer un accord que nous appelons l'accord de participation. Les deux tests légaux confèrent à notre institution ce que nous appelons le statut de créancier privilégié, le Preferred Credit Status en anglais, ce qui nous permet, s'il y a problème qui va peut-être être dommageable, préjudiciable à nos actifs, ça nous permet d'avoir des recours récursoires contre l'État qui a fait défaut, qui a été défaillant. Nous pouvons payer, nous payons pour respecter notre signature, mais ces deux tests-là nous donnent des recours légaux contre l'État et généralement on arrive à entrer en possession de ce qu'on a payé si l'État l'a fait défaut. Voilà ce dispositif légal qui nous permet d'être à l'aise par rapport à la protection de nos actifs et également jouer le rôle de développement qui nous est assigné. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, M. Attaty. AFREXIM est aussi exposé à des pays considérés risqués par les agences de notation et par les investisseurs internationaux. Donc, comment vous gérez cela, s'il vous plaît, M. Aymen Zoghbi? Non, M. Aymen Zoghbi.
Thank you very much, Madam. No, we try to, in all our financing support that we give to the African countries, we try to do it in a structured way, so that we also do not give financing that will cripple the country from further doing any development work, and hence they will not be able to service the debt. So we try always to do it in a structured way, working with different governments and different local communities, by trying to see what would fit for their financing structure in terms of repayment sources, what are the materials that they have, what are the ingredients that will pour into a repayment mechanism into our structure. So we do not give the sort of budgetary financing to the government like many other DFIs would do, because we are trade finance bank in essence. We do so in a structured way, and we provide it to trade finance or trade enabling infrastructure that will generate cash flows. For example, I was just in Comoros a few days ago. We were signing and completing the financing of a hotel resort that is being constructed by another African company from Egypt. So this is, again, for the sake of the government. This will change the tourism economy and the tourism industry in the country, because we don't have similar resorts and hotels to accommodate for tourism. But again, it's built around the cash flows and the business and the income that will be generated from this project, and not just a budgetary support. So in everything that we do, in every financing that we do to governments and to help African countries mitigate against the adverse impact of any crisis or any adverse market conditions, we tie that specifically, we do it in a structured way first, and we tie that specifically to certain trade enabling infrastructure or trade instruments that will generate sustainable revenues for the country and will contribute to the gross domestic product of the country. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. La Banque africaine de développement a toujours innové pour renforcer son profil du risque et maintenir en fait sa notation AAA, non pas qu'elle soit menacée, mais le but ultime est de continuer à pouvoir accéder à des sources de financement à des conditions extrêmement avantageuses, comme nous l'avons dit tout à l'heure. Donc, quelles sont en fait les solutions innovantes implémentées par la BAD afin de préserver son bon profil de risque? S'il vous plaît, Madame Bloomberg.
Yes, of course, this question is very timely as we live in a very volatile world right now, and I think risk management and finding ways to manage your assets are becoming more and more important. But as always with the change and volatility, it's really a way for us to innovate and try as new things, as many as we can, and there's always opportunities. There's always opportunities for businesses who are doing better during volatile times than they are during normal times. So ultimately for us, in terms of managing our situation, we have to have, of course, a very active finance team and a very active risk management team who make sure that we can use our capital base to the very maximum within our risk limits. And of course, as some of the speakers said, we have in-depth project preparation procedures, first of all, that we sometimes are challenged, that we are going into a lot of detail, that we have a lot of requirements, but it's exactly for this very reason that we take all the time to do the thorough reviews up front of the customer, of the project, of the surrounding environment. So this is on the project side. But yes, some of the innovative measures that we have done over the past years, for example, the African Development Bank was the first to do a synthetic securitization, whereby we transferred part of our non-sovereign portfolio to the private sector. So this meant that we were reducing some of the risk, and therefore we're able to lend more again, which is ultimately our goal. But perhaps the most important result of this synthetic securitization was that some of the private sector investors that took over the portfolio had never before been exposed to risk in Africa. So this was a way for them to get involved on this continent. And for us, this is really important because we still see in cases where Africa seems to suffer from a risk perception issue, where people seem to attribute higher risk sometimes to Africa than what the figures would actually show. So bringing investors on board in this way, through the risk transfer, has been for us a way to also dispel this myth that, Africa is the place to be if you want to invest. And last year, we did another risk transfer, this time together with the UK, and this was on the sovereign portfolio, and it was the first ever risk transfer of a sovereign portfolio that involved private sector investors. Also, something that we have done for quite a number of years now is exposure exchange. No matter how good a client is, I think all of us, we have limits on how much exposure we want and how much risk we want to have on one client. So this was limiting us to lend more in some countries and in some regions that were very active. So together with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, we arranged for a scheme whereby we exchanged exposures on some countries. So ADB would provide some of its exposure to the Inter-American Development Bank, and we would take on exposure from some Latin American countries of similar risk level. Ultimately, we were diversifying our risk, reducing our risk, at no real cost. So this was something that we've done. Of course, we are also preferred creditor, which protects us in case of difficulty. And I mentioned that we are doing more and more in guarantees. So when we provide guarantees, we have counter indemnity agreements. So for example, if we provide a guarantee for a public-private partnership where the government has committed to buy, whether it's electricity or water or something, from the project company, if we guarantee that payment, and then the government does not fulfill its obligation, and should the guarantee be called and we have to pay out, we have a counter indemnity agreement that says that the government must pay us. And because we then already have a lot of financial interaction with this country, most likely we never get to that stage. And one of our guarantees have never had to be called. We've never had to pay out because of these counter indemnity agreements. So these are some of the examples in how we manage this balance of working using our credit status towards countries, supporting them where they have lower credit status.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Bloomberg. En plus du financement direct, les institutions multilatérales de développement peuvent porter le risque africain pour les investisseurs internationaux. Et en premier rang se trouve Azizi, l'assureur de référence en Afrique. Donc, Monsieur Kodjo Attaty, pourriez-vous, s'il vous plaît, nous présenter les services offerts par Azizi, s'il vous plaît?
Voilà, Azizi donc offre une gamme de produits, à commencer par la garantie des risques commerciaux. C'est ce dont je parlais tantôt dans mon intervention. Nous sommes catalyseurs en facilitant la transaction à la banque, parce que quelquefois la banque a des ratios prudentiels qu'elle doit observer, notamment le single obligor limit. Dans cet blocage, on intervient pour amener la solution que la banque cherche en apportant notre garantie, parce que en Afrique de l'Ouest et en Afrique centrale, on a la pondération de la Banque centrale qui permet aux banques primaires qui utilisent nos couvertures de pondérer, de faire des pondérations à hauteur de 20%. Donc ça règle correctement ce problème de single obligor limit. Maintenant, pour les projets du type souverain, comme le gouvernement qui a des besoins de lever des ressources au niveau de la banque locale ou bien au niveau de la banque internationale, nous accompagnons également le gouvernement à lever ses fonds en couvrant ce risque-là par notre garantie. Et puis, eu égard au credit rating de notre institution, c'est comme si nous transférons notre profil de risque à la transaction, ce qui fait que la transaction revêt maintenant un meilleur profil de risque. Non seulement ça permet au secteur privé d'avoir les facilités dont il a besoin pour réaliser son projet, ça permet également au gouvernement d'avoir les ressources dont il a besoin pour réaliser son projet, mais le coût de l'opération leur revient généralement acceptable à cause de notre rating. Donc c'est des opérations que nous avons fait un peu partout en Afrique de l'Ouest, en Afrique centrale, en Afrique de l'Est. Donc nous avons accompagné aussi bien le public que le privé à lever des ressources au meilleur coût. Aussi, nous avons déployons un produit qui tend à encourager le développement des énergies renouvelables. Ce produit est mis en place avec la collaboration, le partnership de la KfW, de NORAD et puis de notre institution elle-même, la Banque européenne d'investissement bien sûr. Donc c'est un produit qui encourage le développement de l'énergie verte parce que l'énergie est très importante pour la promotion de l'économie. Mais généralement, ce qui fait le blocage financier des projets de type énergie renouvelable, c'est les sociétés nationales d'électricité qui n'arrivent pas à répondre aux conditions que les IPP posent. Les IPP leur demandent généralement de fournir des garanties pour être rassurés que le paiement, l'énergie qu'ils doivent vendre au gouvernement va être payée. Mais généralement, de surface financière assez modeste, ces sociétés nationales d'électricité n'arrivent pas à fournir, à répondre à ces conditions. Donc, ce produit est né pour mettre les garanties sollicitées par les IPP en lieu et place du gouvernement et permettre le développement des énergies renouvelables. Donc, notre institution, quand même, joue ce rôle en améliorant le profil des risques en Afrique. Et chaque fois qu'on intervient, c'est comme si on transfère notre profil de risque à la transaction et la transaction a un meilleur profil et une transaction avec un meilleur profil de risque. Le coût revient généralement acceptable. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais m'adresser à M. Jones. Quels sont les outils déployés par EBRD pour alléger le risque des actifs africains, en fait?
Thank you. So this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the EBRD's role between the state and the market. And this enables us to operate in a number of different ways to facilitate private sector investment, foreign investment. I'd like to give 3 examples. The first is here in Tunisia. We're working with the Tunisian Investment Authority in a partnership to digitalize their investor services, and through that to reduce the administrative burden and to integrate the services that are offered to investors and potential investors. What's really important around this is also the dialogue that we seek to facilitate and convene between the private sector and the public authorities. Of course, it is the private sector itself that understands best the barriers to economic success and investment, and can come with good suggestions and constructive suggestions to the public authorities of specific measures that can be taken to facilitate that. And so we seek to build those bridges on specific issues where we can. The second example I want to give is large projects, and I would take here the example of a very large package of solar PV projects that the EBRD led in Egypt. It was the Benban solar power project, and that has now resulted in investments of over $1 billion US from EBRD, but also leveraging large-scale investments from the private sector as well in 16 solar PV plants. What was really important to enable that investment to happen was the dialogue, the anterior dialogue that we had on the regulatory environment and on tariff reform with the public authorities. And that positioning that we have in the energy sector in Egypt has also led now to further developments, including in the area of green hydrogen, where recently we signed an $80 million deal with Egypt Green for 100 megawatt electrolyzer powered by renewable energy that will deliver 15,000 tons of hydrogen a year. So these are sort of, when they happened at least, very much cutting edge in investments that weren't previously possible for the private sector, and through our work to de-risk those investments by working on the regulatory environment, but also structuring the deals in a risk-conscious way, in a way that would be appealing to the private sector, we enabled very significant investments to be made. And then the third example I want to give is in the area of value chains. I believe 60 to 80% of global trade is along value chains, and there's a lot of work to be done, as my colleague was saying, on transformation, on greater value added in the value chain in many economies. And one tool that the EBRD has recently developed is the tool of sustainable supply chain finance. And this is a very specific technical way where we work with large companies, large buyers that have a supply chain in a particular market, in a particular country. And working with a financial institution, we buy the supply chain receivables from that aggregator, and then we provide financing to the suppliers in a very near-term perspective. What does that mean? It means that the aggregators, the buyers, have a much more robust and stable supply chain. It means the suppliers themselves have faster access to finance for their invoices, which means that they have a more stable source of working capital. And it also means that through the advisory tools that I mentioned earlier, we can work through this mechanism with the suppliers on, for example, greening their operations. So it may be that the big buyer is exporting to the European Union, where it has certain demands in terms of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and the need to decarbonize its supply chain. So we are able, through this supply chain finance mechanism, to work with the suppliers and help them to green their operations. And so this is a third way of supporting foreign investment, because many of these big buyers are themselves foreign companies.
Merci beaucoup. Je comprends que la syndication est une stratégie phare suivie par AFC. Pourriez-vous, Monsieur Ndawula, nous expliquer comment vous partagez en fait les risques avec peut-être d'autres institutions multilatérales de développement?
Kaouthar, please, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, sure.
I'm having some technical difficulties.
Sure. The question is about syndication. That is usually followed by AFC. So can you please illustrate that, how AFC can syndicate the financing of a project with other MDBs, for instance?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so as I said in my initial remarks, in addition to we raising our own financing, we also rely significantly on partnerships. Because the need for financing in Africa is huge. There is no single entity that can satisfy, be it the infrastructure financing gap or the trade finance gap. We all need to work together in order to ensure that as much financing as possible is mobilized for the continent. So at AFC, it really starts with our arranging expertise. We have a team of professionals that are very passionate about what they do, not only very passionate, but also very competent. And therefore, they are able to identify opportunities and structure them appropriately in a way that those opportunities are actually de-risked and they are bankable and they are viable for investors to come and exploit. So that is really where it starts initially, with the initial arrangement of financing. And then we leverage our global network of partners. We have a network of partners from international financial institutions, international DFIs, some of whom we have here, insurance companies, family offices, and other institutional investors that are looking for opportunities in the African infrastructure space. So we leverage those relationships, invite them into some of the transactions that we arrange, and to ensure that you know, we get uptake for the financing packages that we take out there into the market. The other syndication strength, and some of my members highlighted this, is the fact that AFC has got more than 40 African countries that are members of AFC at the moment. And what that does is that it makes us a preferred creditor in those status. Of course, one of the key issues that investors have investing into Africa is things like the foreign exchange risk, you know, the availability of Forex. The preferred creditor status basically helps to allay some of those fears when it comes to some of those risks. So we find that when we use innovative structures like AB loans, like unfunded risk participations, etc., it becomes easier to syndicate transactions in order to mobilize the required financing into the deals that we do. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. À présent, nous allons nous pencher sur un élément clé pour attirer les investisseurs internationaux, qui est l'innovation. En diversifiant en fait ses propres sources et moyens de financement, la Banque africaine de développement, qui est un acteur de référence en Afrique, nous avons vu des transactions de dette sociale, de dette verte, durable, et récemment même une dette hybride qui vous permettra de renforcer vos ratios de capital et donc d'améliorer encore plus le profil de risque et la notation, préserver la notation de la BERD. Et j'en passe. En fait, quelle est, s'il vous plaît, Madame Bloomberg, la tendance actuelle à la BERD dans cette ferveur innovante?
Yes, so when it comes to attracting investors, I would like to give a few different examples about how we do this on very different levels for different purposes. So first of all, of course, for our own institution, we are attracting financing for our own lending. And some of the innovations that we're working on here includes the issuance of sustainable hybrid capital. This is something that our board allowed us last year to go ahead with. And right now we have the roadshow is ongoing to raise this hybrid capital. So this is basically a combination of debt and equity in one instrument. So it's issued more like a fixed income instrument, but on our balance sheet it's registered as equity. And this means that we can use this capital to raise funds, to issue bonds in the market, green bonds, sustainable bonds, social bonds. And we expect that with this hybrid capital, we can leverage and mobilize 3 to 4 times as much money in the bonds that we issue compared to this capital. So this is a lot of leverage. And we are still, I think, the largest multilateral development bank when it comes to social bonds. We have issued more than 10 billion worth of bonds that are social and green, and this has been used to finance more than 100 projects on the continent. So this is on the bank's level for our own financing, how we try to introduce innovation in the instruments we use. But when it comes also to attracting financiers to Africa and our regional member countries, you know, de-risking is essential. We have heard it from many speakers here. We're all into managing and risk. And one very recent example I would like to give is the bank's support to the government of Egypt, who a couple of months ago issued a panda bond, a bond in the Chinese offshore capital markets in renminbi. And this was worth about $500 million that the Egyptian government will use for green and sustainable projects. This panda bond issuance was the first time an African sovereign issued such a bond in this Chinese market. And the African Development Bank provided a partial risk guarantee to support this issuance, and the guarantee allowed the Egyptians to tap into this new market. It also allowed for longer maturity on the transaction, and it reduced the cost of the funding. So this is a way of innovation in how we're supporting our regional member countries to access diversified financing for their development needs. And finally, I would like to also mention another type of intervention on how we are supporting Africa also in removing some of the financing bottlenecks that we see. And this refers to project preparation. We are all aware of the huge amounts of financing needed for development. But to a large extent, I don't think it's not financing itself that is missing. What we're missing is bankable, investment-ready projects that financiers can invest in. And to this effect, there's still efforts that we can do to put money into project preparation. So project preparation seems to be difficult for all us multilateral development banks, for private sector to do, because it may require either grants, which are limited, or it requires equity, which is risky. So what we are doing right now, we have the Alliance for Green Africa initiative that we are mobilizing right now. We're mobilizing and raising $500 million for project preparation and project development of green projects. This will create a pipeline of investment-ready projects worth about $10 billion. So we are thinking that, again, this will be a major transformation in terms of ready projects that we can then all go out and mobilize investors for. And one of the ways we mobilize investors is through the Africa Investment Forum. The Africa Investment Forum is the largest investment marketplace in Africa. It was initiated by the African Development Bank together with several founding partners, including the Africa Finance Corporation, including AFREXIMBANK, including the European Investment Bank. And it brings together heads of states, it brings together sponsors, it brings together financiers around one table to mobilize financing. But also by having this group together, we're also able to unlock bottlenecks. Sometimes you may have a great project and it's found the investments, but there is a bottleneck in the country. Maybe it's bureaucracy, maybe it's something else. And having someone from the government in the room who has decision-making power has also been very useful in unblocking these projects for financing. Last year's Africa Investment Forum mobilized investment interests for specific projects worth $64 billion over just 2 days. And we therefore think that in this way, the Africa Investment Forum will continue to play an important role in the new financial landscape that we see. And it's another example of how we work together as multilateral development banks to raise to the challenge and the needs of the continent. The next forum is scheduled for the 8th to 9th, 10th November, and it was scheduled to take place in Marrakesh. Now we will see how this develops with the events. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. AFREXIM se focalise sur le trade finance. Comment est-ce que le commerce régional pourrait être dopé par la ZLECAf, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Zoghbi?
Merci. Can you repeat the question? I didn't get the translation from the...
okay. No, sorry. So AFREXIM is focusing on trade finance. Can you please explain how the regional trade would be impacted by this ZLECAf?
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, we're a trade finance bank in essence, and our main strategy is to promote intra-African trade. That's the arrowhead strategy of the bank. Of course, we do support extra-African trade, but we've made it the mission of the bank to strengthen, reinforce, and promote intra-African trade because it's very low compared to other continents. And with the crisis that happened over the past 5 years, COVID and then the Ukraine, it made it really evident that we need to rely more on ourselves rather than relying on other parts of the world. Of course, we'll continue trading and exporting and importing from other parts of the world, but the more we do in regional integration is the more that will strengthen the economies of Africa. And there is no way for African economies to develop but to enhance regional integration and rely on neighboring countries. And that's what we do, and that's why we've developed a whole initiative and a whole division at the bank focusing mainly on intra-African trade through means of financing, facilitation, advocacy, and so on and so forth. So we start by providing the market information. Many would argue that the main obstacle to intra-African trade is the lack of infrastructure, which is true, but we do not support that entirely. In our view, the main obstacle to intra-African trade is the lack of market information. people don't know. People in Egypt, for example, don't know what people in Nigeria need or manufacture and vice versa. So the first thing we do is try to avail the market information. And then we provide financing instruments similar to any other trade finance bank provide, but we do it in a tailored made way to make it relevant, more relevant to intra-African trade. While we say intra-African trade is low, intra-African investment is even lower. You do not find African foreign direct investments. So we try to encourage that. We have a very unique program that we call Intra-African Investment Financing and Guarantee. And through that, we try to help Africans take the decision and make an investment in other African countries by providing the means of financing and also by de-risking the opportunity because of the risk perception on Africa. So really we see that we have a golden opportunity with the AFCFTA coming into force. AFREXIMBANK is in the heart of the implementation of the AFCFTA. We work very rigorously with the African Union and with the FCFTA Secretary to streamline and smoothen the operation of the FCFTA with a lot of support in grants, financing, technical assistance, advocacy work with African countries. So really there is a golden opportunity for African countries to take advantage of that. And we see a lot of political will towards that direction as well. And there are so many countries on the continent whom we call intra-African trade hubs. Those countries that have the industrial base, that have the companies, that have the track record and means necessary to do intra-African trade business and do business in other jurisdictions in Africa despite of all the challenges. And when the opportunities are there and when the trade happens, the infrastructure will follow. So we're trying to use trade finance instruments and trade finance to boost regional integration that will then help also on the regional infrastructure. And allow me to do a bit of promotion like my fellow panelists from African Development Bank did. We also, to promote intra-African trade, we do a very big forum we call Intra-African Trade Fair. It's a very big event. Also work with the African Development Bank and with the African Union to do that. We've done 2 editions so far. The first one was in Egypt, 2018. The second one was in South Africa, in Durban, in 2021. We do it every 2 years. It's a mega event in which we bring African policymakers, politicians, heads of states, ministers, along with the business entrepreneurs, the traders, the exhibitors, to be in one place to exchange ideas, to get to know more about the market opportunities, investment opportunities, trade opportunities in other African countries. So it's a conference and an exhibition that lasts for 7 days. For example, the last one in Durban, we've been able to close trade deals of over 43 billion US dollars involving more than 35 African countries. Tunisia, for example, benefited a lot from the last intra-African trade fair and was able to mobilize a lot of experts to many other African countries and so many other countries in North Africa as well. The very next edition is in Cairo, Egypt, between 9th and 15th of November. It's being hosted again by the government of Egypt, and we're really looking forward to welcome more than 30,000 participants, and we encourage all the audience to get to know more about the opportunities that this intra-African trade would bring and participate actively. We have a lot of information and brochures for that regard. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Nous avons donc pu, grâce à vous, apprécier l'amplitude en fait de la diversité de l'offre des banques multilatérales de développement et des institutions multilatérales de développement qui tentent de préserver la continuité du développement socio-économique en Afrique malgré les menaces géopolitiques et les instabilités politiques dans le continent. Sans aller peut-être jusqu'au modèle très hands-on, en fait, comme celui de la Banque mondiale ou du FMI, qui consiste à vraiment aider les gouvernements à implémenter et monitorer les réformes stratégiques, nous comprenons aujourd'hui, grâce à vous, que les banques multilatérales de développement et les institutions multilatérales de développement plus généralement jouent un rôle très important dans l'allègement du profil de risque africain en général et ça permet d'attirer en fait des investissements étrangers sur le continent grâce à une préparation et à une qualification du risque bien détaillée qui est faite par les uns et par les autres et également grâce à un meilleur suivi d'utilisation des fonds et de mesure de l'impact réel sur l'économie et sur l'environnement. Madame, Messieurs, le temps est écoulé. Merci beaucoup pour cet échange éclairant qui, j'espère, donnera des idées à beaucoup dans la salle. Merci à tous.